Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Creative Kindergarten podcast. We are now on episode 6, and I am so excited about the topic that I'm going to be sharing with you today. But before we get started, I wanted to ask you to make sure that you're sharing this podcast with any of your friends that you think would love to learn more about the world of kindergarten or just teaching in general. So make sure you're passing along this podcast link to any of your friends in the teaching world. In this episode, I am going to be talking to you about one of my favorite subjects to teach our kindergarten students, and that is coding in kindergarten. I know it's a scary topic for a lot of you. Coding seems to be this crazy world of computer languages that not everybody is super comfortable with or familiar with. So I want to break it down for you so that it is something that you're more comfortable to teach and something that you can integrate into your classroom during your school year. So before I start to talk to you about how I do coding with our kindergarten students, I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about what is coding. And I'm going to explain it to you the way I explain it to our students. And basically what I tell our students is that coding is a simple language that we can use to talk to computers. It's the same language that we can learn so that we can communicate with each other. Computer code can help you build websites, can help you control robots. Code is the basics for everything that we need to do on the internet or with a computer. You need a code behind it so that the computer knows what you want. I know that's a really simple explanation, but it's really just a way to explain it to our students so that they really can get an understanding of why they need to learn how to code and what coding is, and make it so that it's accessible to them, so that it's not this otherworldly language that they don't really understand why they would need to do it or why they need to use it. Why can't they just tell a computer what to do? So just explaining coding in a very basic and simple way for kindergarten students just enables them to understand that world and start gaining the knowledge that they need to create their own codes and start coding for themselves. I don't usually start with coding right at the beginning of our school year. Kindergarten students are still getting used to the schedule and routine of their day, and having activities that they know about that are familiar to them makes that transition time a lot easier for them. I tend to start using coding more in November and starting getting into what it really is later on in the school year, and not necessarily starting it right in September because you're already throwing so many new things at them. If you start adding coding into the mix, it might just overwhelm them. The first type of coding that I usually introduce to our students is directional coding. And directional coding is so easy. You don't even need a computer or any kind of tech to do it. And I usually don't even introduce the tech part of this until they're really getting used to directional coding. What directional coding is basically just using arrows to show a path of how to get from point A to point B. You can do this in a variety of ways that don't really need any kind of materials. There is wooden arrows that you can buy at craft stores that students can use, and they can put a doll, and then the doll house is where they want to reach. And they use the wooden arrows to get the doll to the doll house. They don't actually move the doll is just the starting point. The arrows would just show the path that the doll would take to get to the house. I've also used a twister game as the base for a directional coding game. So it has a built-in grid. The circles on the twister game are actually just a perfect size for this. You would just print out black arrows and have something on one of the starting circles. So let's say we've done it with a hamster. So we started the hamster off on one circle, and then we put a piece of play lettuce on another circle. And the students just use these big arrows on top of the circles to code their way from the hamster to the lettuce. Again, directional coding can be that simple. You don't really need any extra materials. You probably already have things in your classroom. And the arrows that I made for the twister game, I literally went into Microsoft Word, used their shape button with the arrows, printed out some black arrows, and just gave it to our students in a twister board, and they were able to use directional coding by themselves. And with the twister game board, it was a lot easier for students to work collaboratively, a whole group of them, because the twister board is so big. a group of them could work together to code on it without kind of being too squished at a table. I also have a pack in my Teachers Pay Teacher store. I called it Unplugged Coding. And what it is just a simple game board. And it has a starting point and an end point that students can place on the game board and some directional arrows that they can place to code on the game board itself. It's really simple to set up. And once the students know how to use it, you can switch out the different characters that I've included so that you can use it throughout the school year. So I have some from the beginning of the school year till the end of the school year, including things like Christmas and Halloween. So you can just switch out those characters, but the game board and the arrows stay the same. So just a fun way to keep coding going throughout the school year without having to do any extra prep. And it's a perfect center. I'll make sure I'll link that Unplugged Coding pack in the show notes so that you can take a look at it, and maybe it'll get you thinking about ways that you can incorporate more coding into your kindergarten classroom. Now that I've talked a little bit about how you can do coding without a computer, you can start moving into using different kind of tech tools to get students coding in your classroom without it getting too complicated. I don't introduce all these tech tools at once. I usually pick one to start off with, and then we slowly introduce other ones throughout the school year. And then by the end of the school year, students can pick from a variety of different tools and a variety of different coding activities without you having to try to explain too many things at once. One of the websites that you can use on a computer, it's called code.org, and our amazing teacher librarian introduced this to me, and our students just absolutely love it. So code.org actually introduces students on how to use block coding. So instead of using just simple arrows to show where an object is going from point A to point B, now we're introducing blocks, and blocks can tell the computer to make that object do a variety of different things. So it might be the block is telling it to move forward. It might be telling the character to turn around. It might tell the character to make a noise. So block coding, it gives you more variety in what you can code into the program. I love code.org because it is so easy for students to use. Once they are on the website, code.org starts them off with the most simple task, just click and drag to create puzzles. And then it slowly moves into harder coding to where they are using the block coding to make characters move around a grid. It is so good for students who are just starting to do coding, or even for yourself. If you're not sure what coding is, you've never tried it, you have no idea what block coding looks like, just go to code.org, click on the student link, and then it has a K to 5 section. Just start off doing the most basic codes and just try it out. It really is the most simple way to get started in block coding. It's code.org. It's also free to use. Now, if you don't have access to a computer for your students and you would like to use an iPad or a tablet instead, there's a great app called Scratch Junior. That one also uses block coding and is a great introduction to students on how to use block coding. With that one, I would make sure that you are doing an introduction yourself as to what block coding is with your students. So you should make sure you're familiar with that app before you introduce it to your class, because it doesn't really have a tutorial on how to do it. It just has very simple block codes that the students can use. You can try just letting them explore block coding, especially if you've already had them use code.org and then you give them Scratch Junior. They might be able to figure out a lot of this stuff on their own. But for the most part, I would make sure that you are maybe doing a whole group lesson or small group lessons with the app with your students before you just let them play around with it, because I think they might get lost and not really understand how to use the different blocks just by playing on their own. I'm sure there are lots of other apps that introduce block coding to students, but those are the ones that I have found, especially for kindergarten. Scratch Junior and code.org are just the best places to get your students started on their coding process. And then as they get more comfortable with with block coding, they can actually move on to higher levels, and code.org just does that naturally. It slowly gets harder and harder on its own. Scratch Junior actually has another app just called Scratch that is perfect for older students so that they can progress through their coding skills also. One of the last things that we love to introduce to our students is using robots. Again, I don't introduce robots all at once to our students. We usually start with one robot and then we slowly add different types of robots to our program until they're familiar with using all of them. And then you can kind of just pick and choose which ones you want to use for certain days. And students usually kind of get a favorite that they like to go back to. And they just might ask for certain robots after you've kind of shown them all of them. I'll do a quick little breakdown of the different robots that we've used and tell you a little bit more about them. And maybe you have access to some of these robots within your school or within your school board. Or maybe you're looking to integrate more coding into your classroom, and these are just robots that you're looking to get for your school community. The first robot that you can take a look at, it's called Codapillar. This Codapillar, I would say, is for very young students. This would be something that would really be at the beginning of the school year and is great if you even have younger children at home that you want to try coding with. It's literally a Codapillar. It's a caterpillar that is used for coding. It has little blocks that students can push in together and create a code with this robot. It's really simple, really easy to use. Really, it's, I would say, for kids around 3 years old and maybe a little bit older. I would think that students will get really bored of the Codapillar first. I wouldn't go out of my way to buy a Codapillar for the classroom, and it also runs on batteries. That was the number one turnoff for me because I didn't want to be looking for batteries all the time for this Codapillar. But our school did get one for our STEM night to show families with younger students at home how to use coding with their young kids. It is fun, but it's not going to be something that they use from September to June. They're going to get pretty bored of it fast. The next one that is always usually the one that I start off with, it's called the Dash and Dot, and it's two different robots. There's one that moves around the dash, and the dot is kind of just stays in one place, and I can interact. The two robots can interact together. I've never really figured out the point of the dot part, the one that doesn't move. They come as a set because we can... within our school board, we can actually loan out the Dash and Dot system, and they send it to us for a week at a time. It's like a tech library, I guess, that you can get things from. So the Dash and Dot just come as a set together, but I think when you go to buy them, if that's something you're looking into for your classroom, I think that you can buy them separately, and it's just cheaper to buy the Dash on its own. And I would highly recommend just buying the Dash on its own. I don't think you really need the Dot part. The Dash comes with a lot of different accessories and things. I would start off with just the basic Dash at first, and if you want to add on to it because your students really like it, you can. But at first, I would just start off with the very simple Dash, and the Dash just has different apps you can download on an iPad or a tablet, and it lets you interact with the robot using different activities. So it lets you use block coding, or you can use directional coding with it. It just depends on which app you download to use with it. You can play around with it. There's a lot of different varieties. There's a xylophone attachment that you can get for it. So if you're a music teacher and you want to integrate coding in with music, that would be a great place to start and take a look at, because it was a lot of fun, and you could code the robot to play different songs on the xylophone, which I thought was very interesting and was way beyond my scope and understanding of music, but I think a music teacher could really get into that. The next robot that our students absolutely love is a Sphero. So I know that if you go to like Best Buy or Amazon, there are lots of different Spheros for sale. And at one point there was even a Star Wars one, and they always go on sale, and you can get them for relatively cheap. And they are fantastic robots for a kindergarten classroom because they're basically indestructible. Students can smack them into walls, can make them bounce. It really is just a indestructible toy that students can use, but also learn coding through it. So we have used the Sphero for so much in our classroom. I'll actually put a blog link in the show notes so that you can really see our Sphero in action, because we took it everywhere. We brought it outside. We did painting. Yes, this, I forgot to mention this. The Sphero is waterproof, so you can actually put it in water and paint and then just wash it off afterwards. It works fantastic. We created mazes, and our students would try to get through the mazes with wooden blocks. We created ramps for it, so the Sphero would try to go up a ramp and then it fell off. It didn't really matter because the Sphero, it's this hard plastic shell thing, so it is meant to really get bashed around a little bit, and it's awesome for a kindergarten classroom because you don't have to worry about our students breaking it. The Sphero is great for teaching directional coding because the app that we mostly used has like a joystick where you can move the Sphero around the classroom environment. But if you have a school that is willing to purchase robots and STEM products for the whole school, there's apps for the Sphero for older students to use with more block coding and other types of coding. So it can really be used from the younger grades all the way to the older grades, and there's so many different things that you can do with it. I will link that blog post in the show notes. I could probably do a whole podcast just on how we use the Sphero. We had it for a few months, and we just kept coming up with different ways for our kids to use this a couple years ago because they were just so into using the Sphero. It was amazing to watch them just learn and interact with the Sphero. It was a really great experience for them. The next set of little robots are the Autobots. So Autobots basically follow a line that you make on paper. So you can use any markers and then you just draw something on a piece of paper, and as long as the lines are connected, the little Autobot robot will follow the lines. And so you can work on a variety of different skills. At the beginning of the school year, maybe you want to get them writing their name. And so once they write their name, they have to try to make it connect so that the Autobot can go around their name. You can do shapes with it, numbers with it. You can do patterning, all kinds of great things with the Autobot. What I don't like about the Autobot is that it's very small, and I find that they can be very fragile. Luckily, none of our students have ever broken them because we have really been on top of them about making sure they're very careful with them. But it could easily be something that gets knocked off a table by an elbow, or if the line is going off the paper and the students don't notice that it's following the line that's going off the table, it could fall to the floor and break. It's kind of a little bit on the scary side to use those in kindergarten. I would tend to use those more at the end of the year when our school routines are established and I can trust my students with something that's a little bit more on the fragile side. But the Autobots are really great for learning some block coding. You can do different blocks and color code so that the Autobot will follow the color code. So if you're drawing a black line and then all of a sudden you change it to the blocks of code that tell it to turn around, once it hits those colors, it'll just turn around and go on to another line or something. So it's really just a fun way to experiment with block coding. And students really love it and get a kick out of it because they can really just draw anything and then this little robot will follow it around on their piece of paper. And it's just something that they've really enjoyed in the past. I would just be sure that your students are ready for a more fragile unit before you introduce that one into the classroom. And then I saved my favorite little robot for last. If you're going to get one robot, you're not 100% sure what to get, go with the Bee-Bot. This Bee-Bot is amazing. I know there's also a mouse that is sold. I've played around with the mouse. It kind of does the same thing as the Bee-Bot. I would just go for the Bee-Bot. The Bee-Bot is just fantastic. It is the perfect STEM robot for kindergarten. It is just the cutest thing, and it can be used for so many different activities. So the Bee-Bot is directional coding, and it's literally a little bee that you have arrows on the top of it, and you would press the arrows to make the path that you want the Bee-Bot to follow. So what I've done, you can buy these grids that the Bee-Bot can go over, and every square on the grid is exactly how far the Bee-Bot will move forward if you press the forward button. So I bought the clear grid. I didn't buy it. My school bought the clear grid, luckily. And you can place things underneath the grid, like pictures underneath the grid, and to code the robot from one thing to another. I have used this so many different ways. You can do the simple start at A and go to B and code that path. Actually included in that Unplugged Coding, there's like a little bonus file that has the A and B points for that activity. So if I think I have a firefighter unit, for example, and it's like the firefighter has to get to the fire truck. So I have those squares that you can stick underneath the clear grid. So you can just simply put the B-bot on top of the firefighter and use the directional codes to get him to the fire truck. It can be that simple, or you can start making things a little bit more complicated. Our teacher librarian, also, she's just amazing all around, has also done matching games with them. So she'll put a whole bunch of pictures underneath this clear grid and students have to find the matches. She's done them when we were doing our healthy eating unit. She's done them with fruits and vegetables. So she would put pictures of different fruits and vegetables and I'll have doubles. And so if they were start at strawberry, they had to code their way to the other strawberry. I've also done words. And so we were doing a unit on bears and their dens. And so students had to code their way for each letter. So I had on just a card, the letters B-E-A-R, and they would put it underneath that clear grid. They would have to start at B and code their way to the E, then the A, then the R. So they can spell words using the B-bot. There's just so many different ways to incorporate the B-bot into your classroom. And that would be where I would start. If you are looking to buy one coding robot for your classroom, you have a limited budget, or you're thinking of going to your admin and asking for something, I would ask for the B-bot. It's just the best coding tool that I have found for kindergarten classrooms specifically. Also, it doesn't need batteries. You can just plug it into a USB port and it charges, so you're never going to have to look for batteries, which is also amazing because who has time for that? So as I said, coding in kindergarten, it's just one of my favorite things to teach our students. They are really little sponges, and anything with technology, they're taking it just all in. And really, coding is where the future is at for these students. They're going to need to know how to do these for all their future jobs. So getting them started young and really introducing all these topics to them while they're able to take everything in so easily, it's just a perfect place to start them at. So I'm hoping some of these tips and tricks were helpful to you. My one biggest suggestion for you as the teacher would be to make sure that you are comfortable using whatever it is that you're introducing to your students. Don't just bring a B-bot to class and then give it to them and hope for the best. Make sure that you're playing around with it first and getting used to it and making sure that you're comfortable with that technology before introducing it to the students. I'm all for making sure that students can problem solve and figure things out on their own, but you also want to be able to step in and make sure that they're using it appropriately and that they're getting something out of their experience. So that is my little spiel on coding in kindergarten. I hope that you really enjoyed this podcast. And if you have any other questions about coding in kindergarten, make sure you reach out to me. I have so much I want to share with you. I'll also have a blog post that you can take a look at that will have all these tips and tricks and all these websites and tech tools so that you can get a better understanding of what everything looks like and how you can use them in your classroom. And if you have any questions for me, there is a multitude of ways that you can reach out to me. I'm on Instagram. My handle is @creativekindergartenblog on TPT. Or you can find me on Facebook as Creative Kindergarten. And also, as I've mentioned multiple times, my blog, creativekindergartenblog.com, is also a great place to reach me at. Thank you so much for joining me for episode 6 of this Creative Kindergarten podcast. It has been such a great joy to have a place to talk to you guys about everything that I have going on in my mind about kindergarten. And so next week, I am going to be doing a Q&A. If you follow me on Instagram, I'm going to ask some questions to you guys about what you want to know more about. And I'll be doing a little Q&A over here on my podcast just as a fun little get to know me. And so I hope to see you guys next week.